What's your biggest fear if the Harris-Walz ticket is successful? Are you going to actively campaign for President Trump?
Yes, I will.
You were also talking about being blackballed by the media.
As soon as I said something sensitive, they shut off the feed.
This isn't opinion. This is empirical science, evidence-based. Why do you think they're so threatened? Do you think you can be the determining factor in this presidential election? Let me tell you about my day. I was scheduled to fly into Las Vegas to interview former President and current Republican nominee, Donald Trump, to have a sit-down interview with him to talk about what's happening in this run-up to the election, the last 76 days from Friday. Then we get word that RFK Jr. has a press conference and is going to make a really big announcement in Phoenix. So I called RFK Jr. and said, I got a sneaking suspicion what's going to happen. I'd like to talk to you when you walk off of that stage. So I did the interview with former President Trump, jumped on the airplane, flew into Phoenix, and sat down and talked to RFK Jr. here. And as I'm sitting and talking to him, I'm very much aware that I may be talking to the one man that may be the single most outcome determinative individual on who is going to be the next president of the United States. So stay tuned and hear what RFK Jr. has to say that is so powerfully influential in the upcoming election. Robert, thank you for sitting down and talking to me. This has been a really pivotal day in your campaign and your life, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's a difficult day in many respects, but I feel like I'm on the right path.
You had, I think, close to, if not over 1 million people on your live stream for your press conference, and for anybody that is under a rock, you have suspended your campaign. You haven't dropped out of the campaign, you've suspended your campaign. How difficult was this decision?
It was difficult. I mean, all of us, the people, kind of the inner circle who were involved in the decision, I think everybody in that circle went back, did 180-degree turns maybe 15 times in the last 2 weeks trying to figure out what we can do. But ultimately, it was clear to me that because of the media censorship, because I was not going to be allowed on a debating stage, that I didn't really have a path to victory. So my choice was, am I going to spend the next 77 days rallying the troops and getting more money out of the donors without being able to offer them a path to victory? And I think that would have sucked my soul out. And then, I had this interesting series of meetings with President Trump, in which he really surprised me by strongly endorsing the mission for his presidency, saying that he wanted his legacy to end the chronic disease epidemic in this country. And that's been my central mission for the past 20 years, is addressing that issue. What's happening to our kids? We have the sickest children in the world. When I was a kid, about 6% of American children had chronic disease. Today, it's 60%. And these are in basically major categories like neurological illnesses, which is ADD, ADHD, speech delay, language delay, tics, Tourette syndrome, narcolepsy, ASD, autism, autoimmune diseases like rheumatoid arthritis and juvenile diabetes, and then the allergic diseases like peanut allergies and food allergies and eczema. And all of these appeared in the mid-1980s. Oh, I never saw anybody with any of these diseases when I was a kid.
Well, I grew up in the 50s, and these weren't issues.
They weren't issues. You didn't know anybody who had diabetes. You certainly did not know anybody who had autism. And now
Or peanut allergies.
Or peanut allergies. In fact, Congress asked the EPA, tell us what year these epidemics began. EPA scientists came back and said it's a red line, 1985. That gives us a hint about the culprits, because we know it's not a genetic injury. Genes don't cause epidemics. They may provide the vulnerability, but you need an environmental exposure, an environmental toxin. And so something happened in our kids around that time, and it's probably a lot of different exposures. the collapse of our food system, the industrialization of our food system, et cetera.
You and I have talked before, and I've learned so much about you and so how deeply convicted you are about these things. And I tried to help millions of others that might not know how deeply convicted you are. I think we made a lot of progress in that regard. And I know that you're deciding to run and conducting this campaign came at a very high price to you personally, family-wise, professionally. And now as we sit here, I have to ask you, if you knew then what you know now, would you have done this?
Yeah, I would have. I mean, I think it's been costly to me and it's been costly to my family, but I think I've advanced the issues in a way that is going to be helpful to people over the long run. The major issues that I've been talking about, the censorship, the addiction to war, particularly the Ukraine war, and then most of all, the chronic disease epidemic. And I think, it gave me a platform to talk about those issues, and a lot more people are aware of them now, and a lot more people are, it's part of the national conversation, which it was not 16 months ago.
Yeah, and I think people on the outside looking in don't realize what a sacrifice it is to make the decision you made. I mean, it's what, a 16-hour day is like a light day. It's like, well, why get dressed if you're only going to do 16 hours, right? And it's day after day after day. And then you decide to do what you did today. Why now? Was there a reason you did it today instead of 2 weeks ago or 2 weeks down the road?
It was just a confluence of events. I actually would have rather done it a little later. I finished writing my speech today at 11:10, and the press conference started at 11, and I was 30 minutes away. So I was 45 minutes late for the conference because, I had only had really 24 hours to write my statement. And so I would have preferred to do it under a more relaxed regimen, but
Well, you work well under pressure, though.
I work well. We have a team that works well under pressure, and President Trump's staff had a whole series of other needs, and we basically, we coalesced around their schedule.
And I was with President Trump this morning, interviewed him in Las Vegas, and then I headed this way. He's not far behind me. And one of the things that I asked him was about you and what you were going to have to say today. And he had a comment about that for the record, and I wanted to share it with you and get your comments about that. RFK Jr. has offered his support to you and your campaign. How do you feel about that?
I'm very honored by it. He's a very smart guy, a different kind of a guy, but very smart, loves our country, has some, I think, very good views on a lot of different things. And I've known him for a long time. We've been somewhat friendly, actually. And I think he's going to be a great asset. I think he adds a lot to the election. He's got a good following, tremendous following. I think he adds a lot to the election, and I think he adds a lot to if we win. I mean, he's got some very interesting ideas and good ideas. I think he'll be a fantastic and influential person in terms of getting this country back on track. I think if we win, I think he can be very valuable to the country, and I think he can also help us build up the margins.
Will he have a role in your administration? He's a very experienced trial lawyer.
He is.
He's tried a lot of large cases, and a lot of it environmental. So I thought, he might play a role environmentally. He might play a role as Attorney General. There's a lot of things he could offer to the administration.
That's true. No, he's a very smart guy,
But you welcome him.
I do.
You welcome his support.
Well, number one, I've known him a long time,
Right.
and I've always had a good relationship. I mean, we're sort of on opposite sides of some issues, but I've always had a good relationship with him, and I'm very honored by his support.
Well, I've spoken to him about you in the past, and he's always spoken of you with a great deal of respect. Even though you guys have been campaigning against each other, he's always spoken of you with a great deal of respect. What's your reaction to his comments?
You know, I think he's accurate. We've known each other for a long time. In fact, I've litigated against him. I've sued him a couple of times on golf courses that he was building, or he's trying to build up in the New York State reservoir watershed. And I was suing to keep them from being built. But even during that time when I was litigating against him, he ended up giving me a ride to Florida on his plane. So, and we were friendly. And, you know, we had a great time and a lot of laughs. He's a very congenial, amiable, interesting guy, and very warm.
Do you foresee pushing your agenda forward, maybe as part of that administration? Is that a possibility?
Yeah, I mean, we talked about that. We talked about his commitment to chronic disease. It's one of the things that brought us together. A couple of hours after the assassination attempt, Phil, I got a call from Callie Means, who's kind of the leading advocate in the country against chronic disease and against processed food, which is really poisoning our children. He's been advising me for a long time and consulting with me. And he called me that night and he said that he was also advising President Trump on this issue, which made me happy that President Trump even, knew about this issue. And he asked if I'd be willing to talk to President Trump, and I said yes. And President Trump then called me a little while later. And then we ended up meeting with each other the following day and then doing a series of meetings. And a lot of that time we spent talking about the Ukraine war, about dismantling this addiction that we have to foreign wars, but also talking about the chronic disease epidemic. And President Trump said that he wanted that as his legacy to solve it. So, I'll do anything that I can to make sure that happens.
Having gotten to know you as I have the feeling that you feel a sense of commitment to your supporters and to your donors, and the things that they've supported and continued to. I can't imagine you telling them that journey or fight is over. You're going to continue to push those issues, and part of the way to do that might be through the administration, or it could be in other ways, but there's no way you're going to let up on the things that you've been espousing. I heard you in your press conference thanking them for their support and letting them know that's not over. You're continuing those same agendas, those same priorities. That's still important to you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to use my own resources, my energies and talents, as long as I can. This is, to me, the most important issue in our country today because we have the highest chronic disease burden of any country in the world, and it's destroying us. It's $4.3 trillion a year. It's costing our country 5 times the military budget. When my uncle was president, the medical expenditures on chronic disease were 0. Today, it's 95% of our healthcare expenditures. It's sinking our country. And we're getting sicker and sicker. We're paying twice what Europeans do for healthcare. We have the worst healthcare outcomes in the world. It's all because we're being mass poisoned by processed foods, by pesticides, by chemicals, by pharmaceutical drugs. And there's a series of industries that actually make money by keeping us sick. It's not just industries, but it's the med schools, the hospitals, the insurance companies you would think would want us healthy, but they actually make more money if we get sicker. And then, of course, the pharmaceutical companies, if you have a chronic disease, you're a lifetime patient. This drug, Ozempic, costs $1,500 for a week. And there's now a bill before Congress that would force the insurance companies, Medicare, to pay for it for every American who's obese. Well, that's 74% of our population.
Right.
That's going to be $3 trillion a year. And for a tiny fraction of that, you could give every American 3 meals a day of organic food, and diabetes would disappear overnight. Diabetes is treatable with food,
right,
with exercise, and obesity is.
And what you talk about is empirically verified. This isn't just some theory that you hatch in your back room sometime. These things are factually based. They're empirical. And I think that's so important. It was important to me that whenever you were talking about this, you were also talking about being blackballed by the media, because we had so many people that were not wanting to put you on the air, ABC, NBC, CBS, all the major networks, and this has continued. Now, at Marriage Street, we put you on, of course, and going to continue to put you on, as long as we can lure you in there, because we're talking about science. This isn't opinion. This is empirical science, evidence-based. Why do you think they're so threatened? Are we following the money here? Is that what it gets down to?
I think in terms of the television networks are very, very dependent on pharmaceutical advertising. I knew Roger Ailes very well. Roger Ailes was, of course, the founder of Fox News and the CEO of Fox News for many years. He and I were on opposite sides of the political spectrum, but we had this friendship that survived all that. He would always made sure that I could get on his platform to talk about environmental issues. So I was the only environmentalist who was going on Sean Hannity and Bill O'Reilly and Neil Cavuto for many, many years. And at one point I made a film about the impacts of the relationship between mercury and this epidemic of neurological injuries and mercury in medical products. And I showed him the film, and he said, you know, I have a family member who I think was injured by this. And he said, this is a really important film. He said, I can't allow you onto my network for this, because for the evening news division, about 70% of our revenues are coming from pharmaceutical companies. And he said to me at that time that typically there are 23 ads on a evening news segment show, and that 17 of those on average are pharmaceutical. Mm-hmm. He said, if any of my hosts allowed you on TV, I'd have to fire them. And if I didn't, I would hear from Rupert, meaning Rupert Murdoch, within 10 minutes. Yeah. He was very clear to me about that. I've seen that evidence across the board with all of the networks. They're very, very sensitive to their advertisers. And those companies are advertising not just as a platform for selling product, but also because they can dictate content. They can make sure that, you know, who's ever on that news show is towing the line.
Well, we had Kelly Means on my show, Dr. Phil Primetime, talking about the very things that you're focusing on here, and my audience was fascinated because there were things they had not heard before. Yeah. There were facts, information they had not heard. And that show, we put it on we have an app, Merit Plus, where you can watch those shows after the fact. And that show just continued its audience grew and grew and it continues to this day to grow based on the information that was given. Yeah. People were fascinated by what he had to say.
He's riveting.
You're exactly right, and people don't know because the information is not being put out there. Did you ever think you would see this kind of censorship in our lifetime?
No. It's shocking to me. Even today, I mean, I'm not shocked by it anymore.
Yeah, no, we're not anymore.
No, but I'm even, you know, when I did my press conference right now, as soon as I said something sensitive, CNN shut off the feed, and Facebook did too. So, you know, I won a case. In fact, this week I got a judgment from a federal court against the Biden White House for censoring my speech on the social media platforms, for ordering the social media platforms to censor my speech. 37 hours after he took the oath of office, President Biden's White House was opening these portals. And this is all in the judge's decision. It's a 155-page decision. The portals were run by the FBI, but all these other agencies like the CIA, CISA, which is the center of the censorship industrial complex, the IRS, DHS, were invited into this portal, which gave them access to all the social media sites, and they were allowed to censor those and people that they didn't like. And, you know, it's they called it misinformation, but actually Facebook at one time, we know this because we have the emails, said actually what he's saying is scientifically accurate. And so they came up with a new word called malinformation, which is information that is factually accurate, but it is nevertheless inconvenient for the government. And that was one of the categories that
So
they
that's
were.
malinformation.
You know, George Martin said the government does not tear a man's tongue out to stop him from telling lies. They tear his tongue out to stop him from telling the truth.
Yeah.
At the White House urging, Instagram deplatformed me, and I lost 1 million followers. But Instagram was not able to point to a single post of mine that was factually inaccurate. We had, by that time, the most robust fact-checking operation probably in the country. We had a volunteer group of 350 MD physicians and PhD scientists, including Luc Montagnier, who won the Nobel Prize for discovering the AIDS virus. We had this group that was a scientific advisory group that was looking at everything that we posted, and everything we posted was cited and sourced, either peer-reviewed publication or a government database. We were very careful about to make sure everything was documented truth. And nobody else really does that these days, but we were doing it. But nevertheless, they deplatformed me and said it's from misinformation, but they couldn't point to a single post I'd made that was actually factually inaccurate. It was disturbing for our democracy because, you know, Hamilton, Madison, and Adams said that we put freedom of expression in the First Amendment because all the other rights are dependent on it. If you have a government that can silence its critic, that government has license for every atrocity.
Yeah.
And, you know, there's never been a time in history where we look back and say, the guys who were censoring speech were the good guys. They're always the bad guys because it's always the first step down that slippery slope to totalitarianism. They start with censoring speech, and once they can do that, they can really do anything. And in a democracy, democracies are constructed on this infrastructure of the free flow of information, that we can all get access to information. And the theory is that through the fierce annealment in the furnace of debate, that the best ideas rise, and that's, you know, democracy can then take advantage or make policy of ideas that have triumphed in a marketplace. This is our advantage over totalitarian systems, because totalitarian systems are much more efficient. If you can just tell everybody what to do and make decisions instantly, and there's no pushback, and their democracies are sloppy, but they can outcompete totalitarian systems because that mechanism of free flow of information and debate gives us an advantage in the marketplace and in government. Information flows are the sunlight, they're the soil, they're the fertilizer, and the water for democracy. And when you cut it off, democracy withers and dies.
In your press conference, you talked about the Democrat Party as though you feel like it doesn't exist the way it existed a generation ago or 2 generations ago, that there's not a Democrat Party as you knew it growing up. Is that an accurate read? Did I hear you right?
Yeah, it still has this kind of tribal identification. But the things that it stood for, like, you know, the Kennedy Democrats, my father, my uncle's Democratic Party was very different. That Democratic Party was anti-war. It was, you know, pro-constitutional rights, pro-civil rights, starting with the Bill of Rights and the freedom of speech. It was on the side of working people and cops and firefighters. It was on the side of the environment, but not just climate change and big, you know, offshore windmills and carbon capture. It was protecting habitat in whales, which it's doing the opposite today. And then it was on the side of Main Street, you know, small business, and it was the opponent of the corporate capture and this merger of state and corporate power, of big money, big data, big tech, big banking, Wall Street. But today, that is the constituency of the Democratic Party. It's the big powerhouses. The cops and firefighters are long gone, and any kind of loyalty to labor is pro forma.
How was it hijacked? Who hijacked it?
I think, you know, the big change that happened came with the Citizen United case. So we had a law in this country that was passed in 1908 that made it illegal for corporations to give to federal political candidates. And prior to that, we had really lost our democracy. And there was a series of laws that happened, that Teddy Roosevelt and the muckraking journalists and the populists and the progressives at the beginning of the century really restored democracy from the Gilded Age when, the Rockefellers and the Morgans, the Carnegies, and the Fricks took control of our government. So they made direct election of senators. They gave women the vote. They made the 40-hour work week. They banned child labor. They implemented the first income tax so that wealthy people had to pay their share, and corporate income taxes as well. The most important thing that they did was they passed a law that made it illegal for corporations to donate to federal political candidates. Well, in 2010, 102 years later, a very business-friendly Supreme Court made a holding that donations are a form of free speech. They're therefore protected by the First Amendment. And this unleashed a tsunami of corporate wealth into the American political process, and it put all of these terrible trends on steroids. The total cost of a presidential campaign was about $1 billion. This year, this presidential campaign will cost $15 billion. And to run for Senate in New York, it costs $300 million. So that the guy who's running today is spending his entire time calling up millionaires and billionaires because that's the only thing he has time to do. So if you can't write that check, he's not going to be talking to you, and he just doesn't have time to do it because he needs to be dialing for dollars all the time. And you started to see after that all of these mechanisms put in place that have shifted wealth upward from the American middle class to this new oligarchy of billionaires. And during COVID, was kind of the coup de grace of that trend. So COVID, we shut down all the Main Street businesses, 3.3 million businesses, insane.
And they didn't come back.
No, and 41% of black-owned businesses will never reopen. And some of those are 3 generations of equity in them. Yeah. And who did we leave open? Amazon and and Walmart and Facebook, and they all made billions and billions because they got to close their competitors. And there was $4.3 trillion shifted upward from the American middle class to this, new aristocracy that we have. And we created in 500 days a billionaire a day globally. So you're seeing this concentration of wealth and, between the Citizens United case in 2010 and COVID in 2020, 10 years, I think our government, the political parties, everything in our country was transformed. And you're seeing more and more infiltration and evidence of the intelligence agencies manipulating the public, controlling the media, these really disturbing, terrible trends that are going to now again accelerate with the introduction of AI.
What's your biggest fear if the Harris-Walz ticket is successful?
I think we're going to get more debt. We're already at $35 trillion debt. The Biden administration is running up $1 trillion every 90 days. We're already spending more on servicing that debt than on the military. Within 5 years, 50 cents out of every dollar we collect in taxes is going to go to servicing the debt. Within 10 years, 100%.
Yeah. So you'll never get anywhere.
Right, and it's insane, and nobody is talking about it. Nobody's doing anything about it. I think we're going to see more wars. Vice President Harris' speech was this, extremely belligerent, muscular pronouncement about American empire. It's all the stuff of, the last century that we should be getting away from. We should have a multipolar world where America can really shine, but we're destroying ourselves. We're destroying our moral authority. We're destroying our economy. I think we're going to get more censorship, and I don't think that Vice President Harris has any consciousness or any, worry about how AI is going to affect humanity. And, AI, Dr. Phil, could be a really good thing for us. It can, solve all these medical problems, solve poverty, everything else. And it can actually make government more transparent, more responsive to the people. But it also, and it's more likely, that it will be used by government to absolutely enslave us, because it gives these secretive agencies the ability to warp our realities, to control our behavior, to control our perceptions, and to monitor and to surveil us. And so we need to be building the bulwarks of our Bill of Rights up higher, and we need to all be conscious of what might happen. And we need a president in there who actually is going to be meeting with all of the right people, meeting with Iran, with China, with Putin, and saying, okay, let's do an agreement on how we regulate this. We can't overregulate it. You can't overregulate it in this country, because then you drive it abroad.
Yeah.
Oh, we need to make the United States the hub for it. We also need to make sure that it grows responsibly, rather than grows into something that's going to kill. I mean, Elon Musk said, first it's going to steal our jobs, then it's going to kill us, and that is a very highly likely outcome. That was him being serious.
Do you have concerns about the integrity of this election coming up?
I do. Democrats today are very angry at anybody who questions the election integrity. He shouldn't be. In 2001, every Democrat believed the election was stolen from Al Gore, by the Bush administration. In 2004, I wrote an award-winning article for Rolling Stones talking about the theft of the 2004 election. Nobody called me unpatriotic. It's a fact. We need to be responsible civically, and everybody knows any machine can be hacked. What safeguards do we have in place to make sure that's what we should be talking about, instead of getting angry at people for saying, elections can be hacked. Let's talk about how we fix the system. We put a man on the moon. We have ATM machines on every block that never get hacked. We have, you came from Las Vegas this morning. That entire city is built on machines that can count right and never make mistakes and never give you too much money back. And so we can do it. And you need paper ballots. You need something to check the election. And that's what we should be talking about, rather than did this one get hacked or did that one.
Well, they've used lawfare to keep you off the ballots.
Yeah, exactly.
That's another challenge. It's not just technology. Sometimes it's just flat out assault and using the court system. It's already affected this election by keeping you off the debate stage and off ballots. So it's already been affected, in my view.
Yeah, I believe that I would have won the election if it was the old kind of elections that we used to have, with a primary where people could run if they wanted, where they had fair counts, where they had open debates. What happened with me is we had to do something that was considered insurmountable, which is to get 1 million signatures. And we did it. We had 100,000 volunteers in 50 states. They were working 10-hour days. They were working in blizzards and blazing heat. And every time that they would show up at the Board of Elections with these giant piles of boxes filled with, thousands of signatures, the next day we would get sued, and we would be in front of a Democratic judge, and the lower court judges would hold against us, and then we'd have to appeal it, and we go up and we get it reversed. We won every case ultimately. But that should not be part of the system. That's not really democracy. I mean,
you crafted a trail in your press conference. You're staying on the ballot in the red and blue states. In the swing states, people have said that this could come down to 15 counties in 11 different states, 11 of those counties in 7 states, including where we are right now, that you said you don't want to be on the ballots there, you don't want people to vote for you there. Do you think you can be the determining factor in this presidential election because of the positioning? Of course, if they don't get to 270, if they tie at 269, whole different ballgame. If this comes down to independents in those 15 counties in those 11 states, and you've given your support to the Trump candidacy, do you feel like you may very well be the one that selects the next president of the United States by your influence?
That's possible, but I would have, if I had stayed on the ballot in the swing states. And what I've done, Phil, is we're taking my name off the ballots in 10 states that are swing states. we're leaving them my name on in the red states and the blue states so people can vote for me without consequence. You know, they're not going to be scared, oh, the bad guy's going to get elected. You know who's going to get elected in those states. So it allows people to vote for me who want to vote for me without any consequence. But what we recognize from our polling is that if I stayed in the race, it would have almost certainly swung the race to Vice President Harris, who was trying to throw me off the ballot in all the states. Ironically, I thought that would not be a good outcome because I differ with her on all the issues, war, on the censorship, on chronic disease, on many, many other issues. I didn't think it would be right to give the election to her. And our polling from the beginning showed pretty consistently that if I got out of the race, 57% of the people who were supporting me would vote for Trump. And so me staying in the race would have swung the race, very likely could have swung the race to Harris. And so just getting out of the race, I think, makes it a fair race between them. And then
well, you're close to double digits in some of these swing states.
Yeah, I am.
And if 57% of those people go to former President Trump, that's a real boost to him. That's a real boon to him.
It is. Our decision, or my decision about what to do, I think is, it's much more likely that President Trump will get elected.
So you do acknowledge that?
Yes.
And you have enough that you agree with him on priority-wise that you're more comfortable with that than if it went the other way? Even though you've grown up
Even though I grew up in the Democratic Party, and I had the same kind of orientation towards abhorrence for, I'd say, President Trump as many Democrats, maybe 4 years ago, mainly because of his environmental stances, which I continue to disagree with. But my conversations with President Trump were very amiable, and he talked about starting a unity party, about President Lincoln and his team of rivals. And I could come in and support him because of these existential issues, censorship, war, chronic disease, that I feel strongly about, he feels strongly about, and that Kamala is on the wrong side. I thought I could continue to criticize him on issues where I don't agree with him. And he was very comfortable with that. And I like that too. I don't, I'm not gonna co-sign a lot of the things he says and endorses, but on those issues and on the border, I'm with him.
Are you going to actively campaign for President Trump?
Yes, I will.
So I may be sitting here talking to the one person in this country that is going to pick the next president of the United States by what you did today.
That is possible.
It certainly is. I learn something every time I talk to you, and I hope we can continue this in the next 77 days and beyond, because you have things that this country needs to hear about.
Thank you very much.
Robert, thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Phil.
Right. Well, there you have it, my sit-down interview with RFK Jr. He's still on the ballot in the red and blue states, but he is off the ballot in the 10 swing states that are controlled really by the independents that could be the ones that determine who the next president of the United States is going to be. It's going to be a very interesting run-up to this election. You heard what he had to say. I asked the questions that I think you would have asked. I want you to know I've also made requests to Kamala Harris and her vice presidential pick, Walz, to talk to them, to sit down and ask them the questions that I'm asking the Republican candidates. I'm apolitical. I don't ever say how I'm going to vote. And listen, I've voted both ways over the years. But I want to talk to both sides because I want to ask them the questions I think you want to ask. Not just hearing stump speeches, not just having them read off prompters and give their pivot points. So know that I've got a request out to talk to those folks as well, and hopefully I'll be bringing them to you very soon. I'm after them, and I want to talk to them.